Introduction. Dr. Kevin Eggerith is a highly regarded marriage coach with a passion to heal wounded marriages. He believes that true love can be revived.
I want to share with you tonight my experience with you regarding marital aversions. And hopefully my experience will serve as a warning so you learn what they are and then you learn to safeguard your marriages against them. To begin with, people mistakenly think that their love will sustain their marriage. And in reality, the marriage must sustain their love. I'll say that again. The marriage must sustain the love. I'll pause for a second because we can't go any further if there's a question in your mind. Do you guys get that? Do you kind of get what that means? Is there any questions on that? No? Okay, great. So a lot of couples, they start off very young. They're doing some very specific things when they start dating. We call these love raisers. And they're hardly even aware of what they are. It's just following their intuition. They really like a person. Their intuition says, spend more time with this person. Get a little closer. Have some conversation. Maybe touch them. Your intuition leads you into doing all these kinds of things. And you're barely even conscious of it. Our subconscious is directing us to do these things. And when you're dating, your intuition also leads you to not do some very specific things. And I call these love unwinders. And so as we follow our intuition, we fall madly in love with each other. And you might be in love for 6 months, a year, or 2 years. At some point, it just feels like this is going to go on forever. You have this incredible optimism and this happiness. You have this certainty that it will be just like this, that you'll be madly in love forever for the rest of your life. And under these conditions, you're not only willing to make a commitment, you want to make a commitment to get married. So what happens if the conditions fade away over time? Then what happens? If the foundation is gone, if that emotion is gone, now what happens? See, a lot of young couples, they go rushing into marriage. They feel certain this is going to last forever. They don't feel any sense of a need. They don't think they need to know anything more than they already know. They're ready to do it. And so they typically don't get help. They don't gain knowledge about relationships. They don't gain knowledge about this intense emotion called romantic love. That emotion that's causing them to make this decision in the first place. So they go into marriage with a lack of experience, a lack of insights, a lack of understanding relational dynamics. One of the tendencies that we all can fall into very easily is a tendency to create aversions in our marriage. So I'm going to step back for a second from aversions in marriage, just talk about aversions in general. And I'm going to tell you about myself. I have an aversion. Is that right if I'd be vulnerable with you guys? I have an aversion. See, when I was very young, I worked a job at a car wash. And I had to walk to work every day. And it was the middle of the winter. It took me about a half hour to get to work. I was pretty cold walking a half hour in the middle of the winter. And I was a sprayer. That was like a great position to have. So I was spraying down the cars. The garage door was open, middle of the winter. Within a half hour, maybe 45 minutes, if I wasn't completely soaking wet, I was definitely damp. And you know, I was just completely cold all day long. Miserable. Imagine being wet, cold, the garage door was open all day long. It was absolutely terrible. And then my shift was over, time to walk home. So I walk home, I'm all wet, my clothes are frosting up on me. By the time I get home, my boots are form-fit to my feet. I mean, they're wet, they're damp, they're partially frozen. I can't even get my boots off my feet because they're so locked on there. I have to put my feet up for half hour, 45 minutes, whatever, until they thaw just enough where I get my feet, pull my feet out of there. See, I experienced cold and that unpleasantness for such a period of time, for basically an entire winter. And I had a very negative emotional reaction each and every day to that terrible feeling of being cold. And that created an aversion in me. So today, if I go out in the winter time and somebody holds me up a little bit longer than I would like, let me give you an example. Let's say I'm with some friends, we're going to go into a restaurant, it's cold outside, I'm outside the car ready to go, and they're lollygagging in the car, digging through a purse or a glove compartment or whatever. I experience a visceral dislike. I feel irritated, I feel upset. That's because I have this aversion. It's not their fault, it's my problem. But nevertheless, it's an aversion. So I re-experience a negative emotional reaction when I'm being held up in the cold. Let's bring this back to marriage. I'd like to share with you a story. A couple came in, they needed some help. Once again, I'll change their names for anonymous purposes and to keep the genders straight in my own head. We'll call them Jill and Eric, as I typically do. Jill and Eric, they were a young couple. They got married. They were very much in love. Jill went to her mom and says, "Can you give me some advice? Like, what's the secret to having a great marriage? Like, tell me what to do." And her mom was a little bit bashful and says, "Well, make sure you have lots of sex. I mean, it's important, especially for him. Make sure you're having plenty of sex." Jill says, "Okay, all right, okay, Then Jill goes over to grandmother. Grandmother's been married for decades. "Grandma, can you give me some advice? What do you suggest I do to have a great marriage?" Grandma says almost the same thing. "Well, just make sure that you've got enough energy. Make sure that you have enough sexual fulfillment in your marriage. As long as you do that, you'll be just fine." So Jill and Eric, they just go headlong right into this marriage. And Eric, he was in his young 20s. At that age, your testosterone's high, your sex drive is high. His aggressive level for that age was typical, but compared to Jill, his aggressive level was fairly high. So they go into this relationship, and Eric is a little bit too, should we say, aggressive about the amount of frequency of sexual desire that he had. And Jill, she just said, "Well, I guess this is marriage. I mean, this is what Mom told me about, so I better just do it. Even though it's late at night, I don't feel like it, but I suppose I better just do it." And so Jill imposed on herself something that she didn't necessarily even want to do, but she thought it was the right thing to do, the wifely duty, if you will. And a little more time went by, and they were having a little less heart-to-heart conversation. They just got busy with life. They got busy with their careers. Eric wasn't around quite as much. He wasn't quite as affectionate as what he had been when they were dating. And so Jill's desire decreased even more. So now what? Well, Jill remembered what Grandma said. And she sensed that there was just a problem, just an underlying problem in the marriage. She didn't exactly know what it was, but she knew she didn't really feel right about it. But she had her mind made up. She was going to have a great marriage. And so she went against her own natural tendency to say, "Hey, I'm tired," or "I'm not feeling well," or "Now's not the right time." And she pushed in, and she had sexual fulfillment with Eric, even when she completely didn't even feel like it. And the more she did that, she began to form her own aversion to sexual fulfillment. And then after a while, just the mere thought of it would turn her stomach. She had a visceral reaction. She felt completely disinterested. She didn't even want to talk about it. She had no interest at all. But yet she kept pushing in, and she would make herself do it because she wanted to have a good marriage. And the only thing she knew was Mom and Grandma said that you better do that if you want to have a good marriage. Got to the point where Jill had to go see a doctor. I mean, things were just not working out well for them. And the doctor referred her to come and see me. You know, Jill was so frustrated. She was so sad. She thought that marriage was supposed to be something so much better than this. And yet she couldn't understand why she was so repulsed by having sexual fulfillment. You know, it only took about 10 or 15 minutes. That's it. I just explained to her about what aversions were and how they're formed. I mean, you should have seen her face. It was like this. It's just like a load just dropped off her when she realized there was nothing wrong with her. This is just one of those things that accidentally happened because she didn't know what aversions were or how they're formed. Jill began to learn that yes, it is important to meet your spouse's intimate emotional needs. But it's equally important that you do so under the right conditions, under the conditions that you are willing to. And all you got to do is coach your husband a little bit, coach your spouse a little bit. So for example, all she had to do is tell Eric, you know, Eric, I want to meet your need, but under certain conditions, I need some more heart-to-heart conversation. And I don't mean just a half hour before we go to sleep. I mean for many hours, every day. Eric, I need affection in this marriage. I need a climate, an atmosphere of ongoing affection for me to feel desirous, for me to feel like I want to have sexual fulfillment. And so as she began to explain the conditions that she would be very willing, Eric was an enthusiastic, willing person, very willing to do so. And so the idea of heart-to-heart conversation, for example, he was very willing to do that. And he says, oh, by the way, I've got a condition also. Right when I get home from work, that doesn't work for me. I need 10, 15 minutes. I got to grab a quick snack. I just got to change my clothes, lay on the bed for about 10 minutes, close my eyes, just unwind, and then I'm all yours. So just give me that one condition, and I'll give you all the heart-to-heart conversation that you're going to need. I'm going to do a full circle with this. If we let an aversion take hold or take root in our marriage, it will be very difficult for that marriage to sustain romantic love. Very difficult. So friends, if you find yourself in a position where you have a negative emotional reaction to something that's taking place in your marriage, address it with your spouse. Don't be bashful, but be respectful. Address it so you can change the conditions and prevent an aversion. Thank you.
Very good. I don't know if I told you this or not, Kevin. I was listening to the radio, and this